Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back again with a daily dose of doom and gloom. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of U.S. military vehicles headed somewhere. We're going to talk about where exactly these are going. There are mixed reports, conflicting reports about where exactly the final destination of these hundreds, if not thousands, of tanks and fighting vehicles are going to be heading to. And I'm going to give you my opinion on exactly what is going on here in just a minute. You guys are going to have to forgive me in advance. I'm a little under the weather, got a little bit of brain fog because I ate something I shouldn't have today. And this is an SHTF tip for you. You got to trust your nose. I pulled out this pre-made salad that I got from the grocery store. I smelled it and something about it just didn't smell quite right. I'm not talking about, it stunk like feta cheese or something like that. There was something about it that immediately repulsed me, but I ate it anyways. Sure enough, I came down with a pretty severe fever by mid-afternoon. I've popped a couple Tylenols because we're grinding right to the finish today. We're gonna roll it till the wheels fall off on this channel. Even if I'm on my deathbed, I'm still gonna be doing daily updates. But that's a reminder to trust your gut, trust your olfactory sense, because it's not going to lie to you, and make sure you have lots of over-the-counter medications. People were giving me flack in my shovel video yesterday because I made the recommendation. It was just an offhanded recommendation. You could put any medication in the shovel, okay? It has this hollow handle. Go check out the video. But I put some Tylenol there. I used Tylenol as an example. Now, don't underestimate the power of something that could quell a fever, because you having a really bad fever could mean the difference between mobility and being sedentary, okay? Being 75% and being 25%. I understand there's a good biological reason why the body becomes feverish. It warms up so it can kill off all the bacteria and whatnot. But if you need to move in an acute crisis situation, Tylenol, caffeine pills, any type of performance-enhancing supplements that you can use in the moment. And no, I'm not talking about test. I swear against that stuff. I have to say that because I know somebody's going to drop that in the comment section. 100% natural, pure hard work for the past 13 years. Anyways, guys, you're probably wondering, why the hell is he holding that shovel? Well, indeed, yesterday I released a video about what I thought to be one of the coolest survival shovels that I had ever seen. Coolest in the sense it was the most robust, the most durable, and the most versatile. But the Newsweek comes out with a story today saying that the Russians are running out of ammunition, and they're using Spetsnaz shovels in the trenches in Bakhmut. And it's so bad that, they're doing this melee hand-to-hand combat. And I'm asking myself, well, if that was true, why on earth would they send the defense minister, the highest guy in the Russian military, to those same front lines? Is it that bad that they need the defense minister to take up melee arms on the front lines? I don't think so, guys. Once again, this is just more nonsense media reporting. In fact, if you take a look at the map here, you will see that the actual headline looks something like this. So we got Russian troops forced to fight with shovels as ammo shortage undermines Bakhmut advance. Oh, and the fine print here, Ukraine is running out of ammo. Europe faces pressure to produce more. And there's a crap load of typos in this. Somebody's getting fired. Russian defense minister makes rare visit to front lines as forces close in on Bakhmut. Right. Because of course, he's going to go there if they don't have bullets to defend him with. Anyways, guys, cold steel Spetsnaz shovel. This is the next best thing, okay? This is probably 35, 40 bucks right now. It's cheap. It's just made of a cheap kind of mystery cold steel, probably some kind of low-grade carbon steel. You can use this as an axe. You can use it as a shield. It's actually a formidable self-defense tool. I have some electrical tape on just to give a good grip. I've probably had this thing for at least 15 years. One of the first things I ever bought. And this is based off the Spetsnaz shovel, which is standard issue in the Russian military. So absolutely, shovels are incredibly important, especially when it comes to digging trenches or fallout shelters. Now, what do we got to talk about today? Like I said, guys, pardon the brain fog. This is going to be a doozy for me because this food poisoning or whatever it is kicking my butt. Russian nuclear subs off the coast of the U.S. trigger alarm. Yes, indeed, the Russians are sending their fleets out to sea. They're drastically expanding their nuclear submarine capabilities. Right now, they're in the Atlantic, they're in the Mediterranean, they're in the Arctic, they're heading to the Pacific. They're sending all these nuclear submarines everywhere, and of course, it has the United States very concerned, which is why they sent the E-6B nuclear looking glass type plane, the Doomsday plane that is the command and control center for launching all of their nuclear sub-based missiles and the Minuteman silo missiles. That's why they sent that to Europe recently. In addition, of course, to the fact that there's now no longer any treaties being enforced or being honored by either side. And this is of great concern. And this is why John Bolton comes out today and he says, you know what? We need to ramp up nuclear production. Having enough nukes to have parity with the Russians isn't enough. This is foreshadowing what's coming. He's saying that we need to have more nuclear weapons than the Chinese and the Russians combined. Because it's not enough that we just destroy the Russians. You know, we have to make sure that we can destroy everybody should the time arise. And I'm just wondering to myself, where are they going to get the money to pay for these bazillions of dollars worth of nuclear weapons when they're currently running $1 trillion deficit? Well, guess who they're going to borrow it from? They're going to borrow it from the world. All the suckers who are going to get stuck with that fiat currency when the whole thing collapses. See, right now they're thinking to themselves, look, you know, we might not have much time left with this global reserve currency dollar system. So we have to milk it while we can, while people still have faith, while it's the cleanest shirt in the dirty batch of laundry and people are still buying into what we're selling. We need to make as much, we need to take this fake, fictitious money that doesn't exist, whipped out of thin air, and we need to go buy hard assets with it as soon as possible. People are going to figure it out though pretty soon. Anyways, we got Israel planning on attacking Iran despite an International Atomic Energy Agency warning. The IAEA and the UN came out today and said, you know what? You probably shouldn't attack Iran's nuclear facilities because that, of course, would be a radiological disaster of apocalyptic proportions. Netanyahu said, screw you, we're going to do what we want. So we're going to see the sparks fly there, no doubt. Now, going back to this situation here with the vehicles, because I know some people want to hear my explanation about what this is all about. They're saying that this was from a military exercise, Atlantic Resolve, NATO Resolve, something like that, and they're sending these vehicles back to the United States. Now, knowing how inefficient the government is, if they're planning on sending a bunch of Bradley vehicles and Abrams tanks to Ukraine and they're already right there, there's a good chance that because the government is overseeing this, they're going to send it all the way back across the Atlantic, put some really crappy paint job on it, and send it back so it's decked out in forest camo to be suitable for the current Ukrainian theater. Because right now, it's completely unsuitable for that. I mean, Vladimir Putin would like if you sent this stuff there the way it is now, because it would stand out like a sore thumb. It's clearly made for Desert Storm, the desert type environments. So either way, this stuff has to get painted. I'm thinking that perhaps because it all looks very similar, I'm guessing that maybe that has something to do with this as to why this stuff is here. Because of course the United States is saying, don't worry, you know, we're not sending this stuff to Russia. This could even be for the Middle East. We just don't know. This could be, they're maybe just waiting to see what Israel does. If they trigger a major war in Iran, then this stuff is going to be perfectly suited for a ground war. Now, I think we're a long ways away from a ground war in Iran, but that's one of those conflicts that could just flare up overnight. And unfortunately, you have a lot of hawkish people, particularly in this case on the right. I was reading a report on Fox News the other day that suggested that the Russians and the Iranians are colluding to build a nuclear weapon or to ensure that Iran has some sort of nuclear protections from the Russians. This may be the case. I think this is probably the implication, but it seems to me that people on the right in the United States are more than happy in getting caught up in some war in the Middle East, less so than they are getting caught up in one with Russia. The right seems to like those Middle Eastern wars And the left seems to like wars with Russia for some reason. I still haven't figured it out yet. And it seems like both sides are kind of on the fence when it comes to fighting out in the East. Anyways, I think that there's some misdirection going on here. I do not believe for a second that they're just going to send all this stuff back to the United States. That may be the case. Like I say, we are that inefficient. If we know we're going to have to send this stuff or keep it in Europe, there's a good chance that we're going to spend millions of dollars to send it back before we send it back again. It's just, that's how we roll. But I'm guessing that there's something else going on here, okay? And it looks like these things are primed for a paint job. And that's when you would immediately know where this stuff was intended for, is when it does finally get painted. And that's kind of the dead giveaway with the American military. Maybe they're trying to think about a way that they can, move this stuff without it being so obvious as to where it's going. Because if it's going to the Ukrainian theater, it's got to be put into a forest camo pattern. This is just not going to work. So anyways, let me know what you guys think about that below. What do you guys think of my t-shirt? Your lack of supplies is incredibly disturbing. So many people right now, millions and millions of people, wasting countless hours on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels with these petty, frivolous, trifling dramas. I mean, and even I'm caught, I get sucked into it. Hundreds of thousands of likes on these little clips of people getting in fights in the store. And I mean, what's coming of us, man? I mean, we have exactly what is coming to us. We're going to get it because very few people are prepared. So consider yourself one of the sane ones. No matter how much they try to talk this whole preparedness thing down as being, overly paranoid. This day and age, when you put a person who spends 12 hours of their day watching sports, playing video games and Instagram Reels up next to a person who is engaged in a prudent amount of preparedness and trying to keep themselves apprised of what's going on in the world, and somebody tries to tell you that that is the insane thing, I mean, that should just, But unfortunately, we're social animals. So if there's not the social validation that something isn't crazy, people will often shy away from it, not want to be associated with it. I've come to terms with the fact that I'm pretty much an SHTF, the end of the world as we know it, prepper, long ago. So it is what it is. Anyways, we got U.S. nuclear bombers over the Korean Peninsula right now. They were sending a message to Kim Jong-un, or is it Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-un? I can't even remember. I can't keep track of my Kims anymore. I think it's Kim Jong-un. Anyways, they're concerned, of course, that the North Koreans, who now have dozens of ICBMs and nuclear weapons, and something is definitely going on. I know there's a lot of people who think that this is just a rehashing of what we've seen in the past, but understand that there's never been as many missile launches, missile tests by the North Koreans. They're holding some of the largest military exercise on the South Korean peninsula this month in defiance of what the North Koreans have said. So something is going on that front. It appears as though, and I like to always try to be very reserved in some of the predictions I make. I know that might come as a shock to some people because they see my alarmist titles and whatnot, which are usually just projecting things out a few months or maybe even a few years. But it's inevitable that on this trajectory, this is where it's heading. When you have a country like North Korea that's completely cut off from the world, with the exception of maybe some back channels with the Russians and some rail networks with the Chinese, and they have all these nuclear weapons, and you are surrounding them with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of troops, and now the South Koreans, they did a poll there, and the South Korean people have a supermajority on the fact that they want nuclear weapons now themselves. So you know that this situation is going to come to a head at some point. And I can't imagine why on earth we're pushing them in the way we are right now, unless we think it's a do or die situation. Maybe the military-industrial complex is just getting incredibly greedy. I don't know what it is, guys. But is it sane right now that the U.S. has all these wars flaring up on all these fronts? We're talking about 4 potential war theaters: the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, the Middle East, which would be a massive conflagration, and of course, well, Syria, not counting Syria, which I would kind of lump into the Middle East, although it's kind of at the crossroads between the Middle East and Europe. Then, of course, the big one, which is the highest intensity of conflicts, which is Ukraine. God only knows what it's going to look like in the South China Sea. Anyways, either the military-industrial complex is getting greedy or they're getting desperate. And as we approach the 0 hour, they're going to keep spend. That deficit ain't going to go down, because that's when you know the house of cards is probably going to collapse soon. And when I'm talking about the house of cards, I'm talking about the fiat US as the global reserve currency, because they're going to try to cash in on people's faith in the US dollar while they can. Right now, the US dollar is still riding high for some reason, and it's basically because people are uncertain. They don't know if they can trust BRICS. They don't know if they can trust the Chinese and the ruble and all these other currencies that are trying to make a run for it. And a lot of people are still buying gold. Many countries are still buying gold. Singapore just bought 45 tons last month. The Chinese are buying gold. The Russians are hoarding gold. Everybody's buying gold. The central banks of the world are buying gold because they know inevitably what's coming. If you can't afford gold, then get poor man's gold, which of course is silver. Some people say that's going to be just as useful in the photovoltaic future. Iran and Russia, nuclear collusion? I don't know. It's hard to say. We really don't know what is going on with that situation, although I would think that if the Israelis do decide to attack Iranian nuclear facilities in a way that destroys those facilities and causes a radiological incident, that is not going to sit well with the international community. Okay, and that is going to draw a lot of backlash from a lot of people. Not counting, it may well start a full-fledged war within the region, which would result in possible nuclear detonations. It could be, some people have speculated that the reason why the Israelis haven't went this kinetic is because they suspect the Iranians already have nuclear weapons, or that they are held under the Russian nuclear umbrella. Now, historically, as far as I know, the Russian-Iranian ties have been rather tenuous, at least prior to the last 10 years, meaning that they haven't been that strong. Nowadays, they're a lot stronger. They have shared geopolitical interests, shared military interests. The Iranians are going to be building a base, a manufacturing facility within Russia to manufacture these drones, apparently. So clearly, we are becoming more entrenched and the dividing lines are being firmly drawn. We have South Africa on the brink of collapse. They're encountering major energy shortages there, controlled blackouts. They're talking about a possibility for civil unrest. They just recently did a military exercise with the Chinese and the Russians. So is this just Western propaganda? It's hard to know. South Africa definitely has its share of problems. There's no doubt about that. And they're also one of the biggest producers of gold in the world. So perhaps there's something related to that, although I haven't really delved too much into it. Regardless, the U.S. Embassy there was warning people 2 weeks ago that you need to have at least 72 hours worth of food. 72 hours? Seriously? If you're in South Africa right now, you need a hell of a lot more than 72 hours. You need off-grid fortifications, you need the whole 9 yards, and a whole lot of ammo, most likely. Unfortunately, it is what it is. We have China fast-tracking their reunification plan with the Taiwanese. We got the total collapse of Bakhmut. We got more attacks in Russia. We got people in California snowed in saying, help us. Here's a pro tip, guys. They did this right. I've tried to do this before, and I've tested it out with a drone, and if you don't entrench deep enough, fortunately, they got like 1.5 meters of snowpack there, and this probably took them a long time, okay? But they probably had to make these very deep so you could have the shading required to see this from a helicopter. Otherwise, especially in noon daylight, which is what it looks like it is around here, you're not going to see that well. It's just going to be white. There's not going to be enough contrast. So you either have to lay some spruce boughs or needle leaf boughs or tree leaves or whatever you can in there, or you have to dig a really, really deep trench so it can be seen from a helicopter. Anyways, just in case you ever get snowed in California, they're about to go Donner Party there. If you don't know what the Donner Party was, it was a group of pioneers, settlers, if you will, who were traversing over, I can't remember the exact mountain range, but it was somewhere in Sierra Nevadas, I believe. And they got stuck up there, and they had to revert to cannibalism. eating leather belts and all that fun stuff. There's a movie made about it. You should go check it out. And speaking of cannibalism and cult-like behavior, I was surprised by the Last of Us episode last night on season 8. Now, I was a little turned off by the show, but I gotta admit, some of the wokeness was just a little too woke for me even. And I'm pretty open to woke. Like, I understand a little bit of woke, a little bit of inclusiveness. I get all that, but they went a little bit too far too soon. That almost lost me. But last night's episode was very good because I talked about this very thing just 2 weeks ago about how a lot of people, when they're hungry and they're desperate, they're going to be susceptible to cult leaders and opportunistic people who are going to fill a power vacuum, and they're going to be psychopaths, so you gotta watch out. What else do we got going on around here? Let's just go around the world a little bit, see what's going on. Russian state media warns that a war is coming to a European country. I'm not sure what she's doing here. Estonian PM Kaja Kallas wins re-election, delivering a blow to Putin. I'm pretty sure Putin is not losing sleep over that. Anyways, this is a Newsweek story that's commenting on a story by RT. Now, why it's important is because RT, Russia Today, which is by and large Russian state-sponsored media, because they're basically a mouthpiece of the government, contrary to what a lot of people say, there are certain things they will never say. Even if they do give you a blank check to say what you want if you're a writer for them, there are things that they won't say. Just trust me, okay? Now, they have said that the war in Moldova is effectively coming, and they seem quite certain about this. Of course, they claim that it's going to be provoked by the Ukrainians. Interesting what they say here. Now, listen to this. As I've talked about before, in Transnistria, I'm not going to point it out on the map again, you're just going to have to go and look it up for yourself, because we don't got time for that today, because quite frankly, I'm about to keel over here. This fever is coming back. 22,000 tons of weaponry is in one of the largest weapons depots in Europe, 2 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, in this strip of land which is incredibly pro-Russian. It's very much like the situation in Lugansk and Donetsk as their breakaway republics. During Soviet times, they say, the strategic reserves of the Western Military District were stored here. However, the main part of the ammunition was brought to the warehouse after the withdrawal of Soviet troops from the countries of the former Warsaw Pact. Anyways, regardless, they go into detail about what's in there. Presumably, almost half of this arsenal has already exhausted its shelf life. Doesn't mean it won't work, just means, expiration dates, right? We all know my thoughts on expiration dates. Most of the time, you're still good to go, but with ammunition, that's not something you want to play around with. In addition, there's a large amount of old equipment in the Kolbasana warehouse. There are 100 tanks, 200 armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and more than 30,000 military vehicles in just this one place. About 200 anti-aircraft missile systems, Grad multiple launch rocket systems, and 30,000 machine guns. And this is all, of course, interoperable with what the Ukrainians are accustomed to because it is Soviet-era equipment. So as much as some of it is old, now what they're saying, though, in RT, is they're saying that they already have the place mined and that if the Ukrainians try to go and get it, they're just going to blow it to high heaven. Now, is that going to happen? It's hard to say. But what do the Ukrainians stand from gaining or initiating a conflict with Transnistria is what most people should be thinking about. Because clearly, if Transnistria gets into the conflict, there's a greater likelihood that Romania, who's right behind Moldova, the official language of Moldova now is Romanian. It's always been predominantly spoken there, but they've now officiated it as the official language, and they didn't just do that for no reason. It's clearly to try to garner more support from Romanians, be it culture or otherwise, and that means that NATO is all the more closer to potentially getting entangled in a conflict, because then you have the Ukrainians and the Russians fighting in Transnistria, which of course is a part of Moldova, which the Moldovans say is their sovereign territory that these defectors have taken away from them. So that means that you have a potential civil conflict in Moldova who have strong ties with Romania, albeit they're not in NATO. So that doesn't mean NATO is going to jump right in. It just means that there's a greater likelihood that NATO is it's going to be harder and harder for NATO to back out of the conflict. And if you ask me, if I was like a conspiracy-minded person, got to pull the shovel out for this speculation, if I was the Ukrainians and I wanted to bring NATO into the war, I'd be lobbing missiles at probably, Russia, Belarus. Oh wait, they're already kind of doing that. Russia, Belarus, I'd be trying to light up as much as I can, because what that's going to do is that's going to force a response from those countries, which will likely gain you sympathy from the rest of the world, because most of the rest of the world can't see anything that isn't right in front of their face. So when the headlines come on that say, Belarus attacks Ukraine, it's not going to say, oh, in response to. And again, I'm not trying to say that the Ukrainians don't have the right to attack a country who is currently being used as a staging ground for the Russians. So anyways, it's tangled web we weave, yada, yada, yada. What else do we need to know? A fire at a coke and glass plant near Moscow, and that's not Coca-Cola Classic, okay? It's other industrial type materials. An explosion has occurred in a workshop belonging to the Moscow coke and gas plant. Now, the reason why this is important, guys, is because just a couple days ago, we released that video entitled Explosions in Moscow. And of course, there was Moscow will never admit when it's been attacked. Understand that. They barely admitted when the Ukrainians attacked the Engels Air Base. They're always going to downplay every attack, just like the Ukrainians. So it's very likely that this was the attack that had panicked the population there, but they're not saying that it was the work of saboteurs. See, this was that headline there just a few days ago on Friday. Russians panic on social media after overnight explosion near Moscow. Now, that's not to say that things don't happen. Industrial accidents don't happen, especially during a time of war when you might be cutting corners and working 24/7. But understand that if shit's hitting the fan behind enemy lines for propaganda purposes and to try to keep the peace as much as possible, we're never going to hear about exactly what's going on. As for what's going on in the Middle East, they keep saying, check out this clown, Benjamin Netanyahu. I actually don't like this guy. I got to admit. I usually don't get into politics, but this is one guy I just think is kind of weird. I mean, this is not a joke. He literally brought this to the United Nations 13 or 15 years ago? It was a long time ago. This is the image that he brought to the United Nations. And at that time, he was saying, the Iranians are in the final stage. They're only 10% away from enriching uranium to the point where it needs to be to make a nuclear bomb. They're saying that exact same thing today. Lloyd Austin is flying there tomorrow for God knows what. Remember last year they ran all of those joint military drills simulating an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. So really, all they're waiting for is the green light. Now, the International Atomic Agency and the UN, I do believe, have said don't do it because it's going to be a radiological disaster. For starters, some people think that in order to get at these facilities, bunker busters aren't going to do it. Now, I'm not a military guy, but there's some concerns that they're actually going to nuke the nuclear facilities. Again, that's pure speculation. But if that turns out to be true, could you imagine the uproar, the global backlash that the Israelis will face for a radiological event of that scope and scale? And that is something that the Iranians will never sit idly by and let happen. They can never do that. That was a huge breach of their own sovereignty. And quite frankly, if you have the Israelis who secretly have hundreds of nuclear weapons and we're not saying anything about it, and we're making these hypocritical comments about how, U.S. Defense Secretary warns of unthinkable Iran-Russia military ties, well, maybe we should come clean about the fact that Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. I don't know. Just a thought. Then we wouldn't be hypocrites. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a dummy. We got the concerns, of course, that the Iranians are going to acquire a level of technology which is on the same level as the S-400 systems, either from the North Koreans or maybe they've developed something like this themselves. So there is concern, I think, amongst the Americans and the Israelis that if we get an F-35 shot down by something that the Iranians have, that is going to be mighty embarrassing and mighty telling about how we may well be a paper tiger, which is not what I'm saying. I think the U.S. Air Force is the most formidable fighting force on the planet. They have the most planes, they have the most advanced technology, they have the biggest budget because the rest of the world continues to pay for it. But I think that there's a lot of hesitancy for that reason. Because understand, if one of these jets gets captured, that's it. There's nothing the Ukrainians wouldn't like, or the Iranians wouldn't like more. And remember, it was the Iranians who actually hacked a U.S. drone. That was almost 10 years ago now. They hacked one of the top-of-the-line Reaper drones of the United States. They brought it back, and they backward engineered it. And so these are not stupid people, guys. They know exactly what they're doing, and this is probably why we haven't done the full-on invasion yet. As I previously indicated, the U.S. has deployed nuclear-capable bombers for Korea drills. The Pentagon has flown at least one B-52H bomber alongside South Korean aircraft in a show of force directed at Pyongyang. Again, the level of military activity here is incredibly concerning, considering that now North Korea is armed to the teeth. There was talk that the South Koreans had mastered some sort of electronic warfare technology, or were in the process of mastering it, so that immediately when North Korea launches its nukes, they will be able to deactivate it. I don't have that story here today, but that's something you should pay attention to, because it really does start to look like they're setting us up to get in a fight with the North Koreans. Maybe they think that will be the least impactful, but China is never going to let that go. North Korea and China, contrary to popular belief, are very, very close allies. That's the only way they get these delivery platforms that they've been building over the last few years, is with the help of the Chinese. And everybody knows what's going on. Look, there's the world as we're given, and then there's a world as it really is. There's kind of like a dark web of sorts of how things really are in the world, and that's what our leaders view things through the lens of. And they must know something. They must be very, very concerned about North Korea if they're doing all of this provocation while the North Koreans have done so many missile tests. They have a record amount of missile tests last year. They must know something. Something is coming. I just hope that they're ready, because when this war flares up on 4 theaters, and guys, you better get ready for conscription. It's going to be the young guys they come for first, but people seriously right now, there's all this talk about how U.S. military fighting age men are not fit to fight, 75%. They're going to come for they're going to put in a draft. Eventually, they're going to have to put in a draft, and many people are going to be in support of it. Look, I think that conscription can be good, but if it's just for the sole purpose of getting us into a war, which likely can never be won, then I'm a little more hesitant. But if it's one of these things where you're going to learn some good skills that you're going to be able to put to use, and it's going to teach you about believing in your country and all that jazz, and great. But right now, no. If they're drafting you, it's for a specific reason. It's to send you to the meat grinder. According to Sputnik, which is a Russian media agency, Russia and China both have more powerful supercomputers than the UK. Well, that's not really saying much, because the US supercomputer is around 50 times better than both the Chinese and the Russians. But this is just the reason why I brought this story up, because there's an artificial intelligence arms race right now, and that's the concern. It's not so much ChatGPT, it's what is powering ChatGPT. It's what they're withholding. It's what DARPA and the government has access to that they're not going to ever share with the public. And if you don't think Skynet can become a reality, because there's going to come a point in time where one side is going to see the utility in having a all-seeing, omnipotent system that knows where every aspect is on the battlefield and can just make the best decisions. Just think about it. We put faith in these generals to make these chess moves. Well, we got this many troops here, and they're probably going to do this here. But if you could have an AI which was smart enough to calculate all the factors and variables on the battlefield and give you the absolute, honest to God, best possible guesstimate as to where you should deploy your forces at any given time, many countries are going to be tempted to put their all of their hardware online using that kind of software. Now, does that necessarily need to be a general intelligence learning computer that is conscious and kills off all the people and kills off its makers? Not necessarily, but it means that more and more these countries are going to see the benefit in confiding in automation, robotics, and confiding in narrow artificial intelligence to make these sorts of decisions, because it's going to make more sense. In the same way that 90% of the time a Tesla car is safer than a person driving in self-drive mode. Believe it or not, it is. 90% of the time that Tesla will drive you better than you could ever possibly hope to drive it. But that 10% of the time, actually, it's actually more like 1% of the time, it will kill you. So that's the problem. And that's the same thing with AI. Something to consider if you didn't have enough to consider already. Global internet kill switch. I didn't realize that India was the ones who used the internet kill switch the most. Global internet shutdowns in the number of countries where they happen. The red here is India. The rest is other countries, and apparently it's because of something that was going on in the Himalayas, some sort of uprising or civil unrest or something like that. I don't know anything about it. But this just got me thinking that, they think that shutting down the internet would actually stop civil unrest. But if anything, that might backfire, because that might actually wake people up. That might actually be what compels us to go outside and get connected with people in person, to actually go down to a rally and not just read about it on some blog. So, it could potentially backfire, just like the good old days when people had to go down to Wall Street to see what was going on in 1929 when all those people crowded Wall Street. Now everybody's just going to be smashing their computers when the shit hits the fan. Did I talk about this enough? Russian nuclear submarines deployed off the U.S. spark alarm. This story is a bit of a Johnny-come-lately, but it's something which is developing, because there are nuclear submarines that are increasingly in more precarious waters as far as the U.S. is concerned, closer to the U.S. coastline, in the Mediterranean, in the Arctic, in the Pacific. Russia is putting their subs on full-blown alert right now. The Russian nuclear strategic forces are on full alert, as are the Chinese forces, as are the American forces. So if there's ever an accident that's going to happen, it's going to happen now. They're saying that these patterns of submarine activity haven't been seen since the Cold War. So that should tell you where exactly all of this is headed. I think I've covered all the bases today. South Africa power grid is going down, facing collapse. State officials are warning of civil war-like conditions and the possibility of complete collapse. I'm thinking that's more of a Mad Max thing, crime run amok. Of course, South Africa has been dealing with a lot of social upheaval issues ever since COVID hit, of course, and long before as well. I still can't get over this. Taiwan criminalizing spreading rumors during wartime. This is how you know they're already setting the propaganda mills up. Anyways, guys, you let me know what you think about any of this in the comment section below, and feel free, pick up a Spetsnaz cold steel shovel from CanadianPreparedness.com. It's a great way to keep some hard-working, honest people employed, and we try to pay our workers very well. Like I said before, I don't make money off the store, but it keeps people employed. So I greatly appreciate your support in that respect. And you guys take care. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.